A seemingly ordinary player enters a tournament surrounded by veterans, with little expectation. The brightly lit table seemed like the scene of a predictable night, but something was different in the air. In his hands, the worst possible combination, a harbinger of defeat. What no one imagined was that this very weakness would be the beginning of an epic comeback. Did you like this opening? Then like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing. At that table surrounded by spotlights, the player seemed to bear the weight of all the eyes upon him. His hands were sweating, his fingers drummed nervously on the felt, and his eyes scanned each card as if searching for a miracle that would never come. There was a dense, almost palpable silence that seemed to amplify every breath, every suppressed sigh of the spectators. The veterans around him exchanged subtle glances, filled with disdain. To them, this figure seemed like an underdog, about to be eliminated in minutes, a supporting character in a night that, by all indications, would have a predictable script. What they didn't understand was that, at that very moment, the tension that separates ordinary players from those who make history was being born. The opponents didn't hide their feelings of contempt. Some chuckled, others made a point of slamming their chips down hard, almost as if to declare, "You won't last long here." This collective reaction was typical of environments where experience trumps empathy. How often do we see this in real life? In a boardroom, in a selection process, or even among a group of friends, when someone considered weak is underestimated before they even demonstrate their true capabilities. It's as if society is in a rush to label those who don't seem to fit the expected standard. There, at that table, history repeated itself. A preemptive judgment, based not on results, but on superficial impressions. And as the audience watched, the emotional atmosphere intensified. The player felt every look like a sentence. He doesn't stand a chance. This psychological toll is devastating, and everyone has felt something similar. Whether it's when you submit a creative work and someone turns up their nose, or when you decide to start a business and hear, "This won't work." The pain of contempt is so intense that many give up before even starting. But there's a silent lesson there. Other people's judgment is only powerful if you accept it as truth. What his rivals didn't know is that, behind his trembling hands and uncertain expression, this player harbored an unexpected element, the courage to face the table even with the worst possible hand. The silence that gripped the table seemed like a harbinger of an already expected outcome. A player with the worst possible hand was facing veterans who knew every trick in the book. Everything indicated that this round would be brief, just another insignificant episode in a long night of cards. But in moments like these, the unexpected often happens. He took a deep breath, gripped his chips tightly, and, against all logic, made a high bet. Not a timid move, not a play to go unnoticed, but a frontal attack. The looks that had previously been of disdain turned to surprise. Was as if someone condemned to defeat had found the strength to defy the sentence. The panel reacted with disbelief. There was nervous laughter, raised eyebrows, and even the occasional offhand comment, "He's trying to show off." But that seemingly suicidal decision changed the mood in the room. The audience, previously distracted, turned their gaze to that specific point, as if realizing there was more to the story than first appeared. That's how life works. Sometimes, a single bold gesture can turn the tide. Think, for example, of entrepreneurs who started businesses in times of crisis, when everything told them to retreat, and precisely because they dared gained ground no one imagined. Calculated risk always attracts attention, because it reminds us that courage has a silent power to deconstruct certainties. The opponent on his left, an experienced player, stared at him with a mixture of curiosity and contempt. He couldn't accept that someone with so little in hand could have the audacity to bet big. He's bluffing, he thought, and that thought echoed around the table. But the thing is, a bluff, when backed by conviction, can be as powerful as the best card in the deck. The audience felt this shift in energy. The atmosphere was no longer predictable and became charged with tension. People shifted in their seats, some whispering, "Does he know something the others don't?" This kind of atmosphere isn't born of luck, but of the courage of those who decide to put everything to the test. And mind you, this doesn't just happen in poker tournaments. Anyone who's faced a moment when they needed to stand against the current knows exactly what it means to bet big with little in hand. It's the employee who asks for a promotion when everyone else says it's not the time. It's the student who applies for an elite university despite a mediocre track record. It's the small investor who believes in a startup when no one else sees a future there. The first bold move always raises eyebrows because it defies prevailing logic. But, if sustained by determination, it has the power to create new narratives. The calmer players tried to hide their discomfort. They pretended nothing was happening, but the tension was clear. The mere fact that an underdog was willing to risk everything shook the veterans' emotional foundations. This is because, in games like this, the power lies not only in the cards, but in reading people. And at that moment, he began to gain psychological ground. Their opponents were no longer dealing with just a rookie. They were facing someone with something more, something they couldn't immediately decipher. Their initial laughter turned to unease, and their confidence turned to doubt. It's interesting to note how, in any competitive environment, the first turnaround comes from shattering expectations. In the business world, great companies have emerged when someone decided to do exactly the opposite of what everyone expected. Think of Netflix, which emerged when the prevailing logic was to rent DVDs in physical stores. Or Tesla, which bet on electric cars when the automotive industry insisted there was no market. In poker, as in life, the first bold move is always met with sarcasm, but sooner or later it forces everyone to rethink their game. Meanwhile, the protagonist felt a mixture of fear and excitement within himself. Betting big with the worst possible hand is like walking on the edge of an abyss. One false step, and it's all over. But it's precisely this proximity to risk that awakens a latent strength. With each chip pushed to the center of the table, he challenged not only his rivals, but also his own insecurity. And this is a crucial point. Often the true adversary isn't the one sitting on the other side, but the one living within us. The fear, the doubt, the belief that we're incapable. Overcoming this internal enemy is the first step to transforming any predicted defeat into a surprising victory. Eyes met, mental calculations boiled, and with each passing second the weight of the play grew. This was no longer just a risky move, it was a game changer. The audience, which until then had seen an underdog about to fall, began to wonder, what if he's about to change everything? This shift in perception is powerful because it creates a narrative. What was contempt became expectation. What was certain of failure became suspense. And suspense is the fuel that drives any unforgettable story. Interestingly, even if he had lost the round, that move would have already changed his position in the game. Because betting big isn't just about winning chips, it's about earning respect. And respect, once earned, can't be taken away so easily. That opening play wasn't just a bluff. It was a silent declaration that he wasn't there to be a sidekick. He was there to defy every unwritten rule of the table. And that, in itself, made him a competitor worthy of attention. And of course, this boldness was just the beginning. Because a first move is only valuable if it's sustained in subsequent rounds. It's like in life. There's no point in taking a bold step and then backing down at the first obstacle. You need to follow through, show consistency, and turn the moment into a trajectory. And while the table was still trying to decipher what had happened, the player was already preparing for the next round. The loop was open. The unexpected had appeared, and from then on, no one would look at him the same way again. As the rounds progressed, something curious began to happen. That player, who until moments ago had been seen as a supporting player, began to dictate the pace of the table. Every bet, every move, every calculated glance reconstructed the narrative around him. What was once considered a lucky bluff began to become an uncomfortable sequence for the veterans. And herein lies the irony. When someone dares to stand firm in the face of pressure, little by little the walls of distrust begin to crack. He didn't need the best cards. He just needed consistency. And consistency, as we know, is the key that separates those who last in the game from those who disappear after their first unexpected victory. With each new hand, his confidence grew almost visibly. It wasn't the arrogant kind that overflows and ultimately provokes rejection. It was a quiet, discreet, almost pedagogical confidence that taught something with each play. He observed his opponents with a calmness that contrasted with his shaky hands from the first round. It's fascinating to see how posture can change a person's perception. Imagine someone entering a job interview. At first, insecurity is evident, but as the questions progress, they find their rhythm, respond firmly, and before long the interviewer no longer sees a beginner, but someone ready to fill the position. This is the logic of escalation. Each answer, each play, each attitude cements respect. The veterans, accustomed to a cold and meticulous game, began to find the newcomer's bold style strange. They bet cautiously, waiting for the predictable moves that dominated the tournament scene. But he, on the other hand, seemed to walk a tightrope, betting big when he should have backed off, backing off when everyone expected an offensive. This contrast was disturbing. Essentially, it's the same thing we see in traditional companies when a startup emerges with agile and creative methods. While the giants follow meticulously calculated rules, the smaller player emerges with boldness, flexibility, and the courage to make mistakes quickly. And often, that's precisely what changes the game. It wasn't long before each of his victories stopped being attributed to luck. The chips piled up in front of him like small, concrete proof that there was method to his madness. The audience began to cheer, not just for the possibility of an underdog winning, but because everyone there recognized the feeling of being against the odds. Who hasn't felt diminished in a hostile environment and yet found the strength to surprise? That's why the audience connected with him. It wasn't just about poker, it was about life. It was about every time someone doubted you and you managed to prove you were greater than they believed. Each round, however, increased the psychological tension. The rivals tried to decipher whether they were facing a prodigy of human reading or simply someone experiencing a rare moment of inspiration. And at this point, psychology weighed more heavily than any ace up his sleeve. He used calculated pauses, firm looks, and even silence as weapons. It's curious to see how invisible details, the way he moved the chips, the speed of a decision, the firmness of a gaze, can completely alter the power dynamics. This isn't just true at the gaming table. Think of leaders who don't shout, but who silence the room with their posture alone. Or teachers who don't need to raise their voices to hold their students' attention. The real escalation lies in dominating the space without much noise. The veterans began to divide. Some withdrew, betting less, trying to wait for the moment when he would make a fatal mistake. Others became aggressive, doubling down, wanting to take him down by any means necessary. But both groups were playing on his own turf, reacting. This is the power of someone who leads a climb. They make others react rather than acting on their own initiative. It's like in the market. When a small company launches an innovation, the giants rush to respond. And in responding, they end up accepting the pace set by the challenger. Meanwhile, the player felt an internal shift. The initial fear was no longer the protagonist. In its place was a kind of clarity. He noticed patterns that had previously gone unnoticed. A nervous tick here, a hesitation there, a smile disguised as confidence. It's like when you learn to drive, and at first, you have to think about every detail, pressing the clutch, shifting, gears, checking the rearview mirror. But over time, everything becomes natural, and you begin to notice your surroundings. The pedestrian crossing, the distracted car ahead, the light about to change. He had reached that point in the game. The increasingly engaged audience no longer wanted to see just victories or defeats. They wanted to see how far this improbable event could go. And this anticipation fueled the escalation even further. Each chip pushed to the center of the table was accompanied by sighs, whispers, and attentive glances. The atmosphere had completely changed. What began as a predictable spectacle had transformed into an unpredictable drama, where each new round could mean a legend in the making. And it is precisely this unpredictability that holds the attention. It's not about knowing what will happen, but about feeling that anything could happen. The curious thing is that, amidst this climb, he himself seemed to forget the weakness of his starting hand. The worst possible combination was no longer the center of the narrative. What mattered now was the story he was writing with each choice. And this is a powerful lesson. Often it doesn't matter where you started, but what you do with what you have. A difficult background, a mediocre resume, a slim chance. None of these define the end of the story if you have the courage to climb. And so, the night that promised to be just another trivial tournament turned into a stage for thrilling twists and turns. The previously invisible protagonist had become the central figure. It was no longer just about cards, but about strategy, courage, and the ability to weaponize weakness. The escalation was underway, and everyone knew. There was still much more to come, and the true test had yet to come. As the competition progressed, it was inevitable that the spotlight would begin to focus not only on the protagonist, but also on those who dared to face him. Among the veterans, one specific rival emerged as a natural antagonist, a player with a strong presence, known for his coolness at the tables, and a history of defeating opponents with irony and subtle provocations. He didn't see the underdog as a legitimate threat, but as an intruder who needed to be put in his place. With each play, he made a point of making scathing comments, trying to break the newcomer's focus. He was like that coworker who, instead of helping, prefers to destabilize others with tasteless jokes and innuendos. It's not about the game itself, but about the wounded vanity of someone who refuses to accept that someone unexpected could change the rules. This rival played not only with cards, but with words. He used false smiles, lingering glances, and calculated gestures to impose intimidation. He knew that in poker, the mind is as important as the hands, and he sought to exploit any emotional opening. The audience sensed this tension. Every exchange of glances between them was charged with meaning, like a silent duel about to explode. What was once a technical tournament became a psychological battle as well. And here's a reflection. How often, in real life, is the real obstacle not the task itself, but the people around us who try to undermine our confidence? Whether it's an authoritarian boss, an unfair competitor, or even disbelieving family members, everyone has faced figures who play this role of invisible but powerful rival. The audience, which initially only followed the underdog's rise, now cheered for the direct clash between the two. It was like watching a movie. On one side, the unlikely hero. On the other, the experienced antagonist, who seemed to have all the weapons to win. The audience was divided, but there was a collective energy rooting for the newcomer's resilience. After all, everyone loves to see a fair fight against those they underestimate. Every provocation hurled by the veteran was met with anticipation. How will he respond now? This suspense made each move more intense, more cinematic. The protagonist, for his part, didn't give in to provocations. He had learned that reacting emotionally was handing ammunition to his opponent. Instead, he responded with calculated silence, a discreet smile, or a bold move that dismantled his rival's narrative. This stance wasn't just strategy, it was a lesson in emotional discipline. Think, for example, of everyday situations in which someone tries to provoke you, in traffic, on social media, or at work. Reacting in the heat of the moment may seem satisfying, but often, the greatest power lies in maintaining control and responding with actions that speak louder than words. Over time, the tension between them became the guiding thread of the tournament. Other players were still present, of course, but the dueling atmosphere was evident. This psychological clash became the true test of the night, because it wasn't just about winning chips, but about proving who had the greater mental toughness. The veteran used experience, sarcasm, and aggression. The rookie used boldness, calm, and a knack for reading people. It was a clear contrast in styles, and precisely this contrast held everyone's attention. What no one knew, however, was that this duel was just beginning, and that the following cards would bring revelations capable of transforming the table into a stage for something much bigger than simple bets. With each new round, what had previously seemed merely bold began to reveal itself as part of something larger. The player, previously seen as insecure, began to demonstrate an almost surgical reading of situations. He no longer trembled when holding his chips, nor averted his eyes when stared at. On the contrary, now he was the one holding the gaze, the one taking long, uncomfortable pauses before betting, forcing his rivals to reveal themselves through involuntary gestures and expressions. This silent dominance was proof that it wasn't a coincidence, but rather preparation. He had arrived ready to turn every weakness into a weapon. It was like a fighter who, after taking a beating in the first few rounds, learns to use his opponent's strength against him. The public began to sense something different in the air. He was no longer just an underdog taking a chance. He was a strategist who knew exactly what he was doing. Bad hands were no longer a source of shame, but rather a stage for showcasing his skill. He demonstrated that any card, no matter how bad, could be turned into an advantage if handled intelligently. And this offers a powerful lesson. How many times in life have you found yourself with limited resources, without support, seemingly without a chance, yet still found a way to turn the tables? It's like the small entrepreneur who takes on multinationals and wins clients through proximity and creativity, or like the student who, without access to expensive prep courses, learns with discipline and outperforms competitors in competitive exams. His direct rival, the one who had positioned himself as an antagonist, began to lose emotional control. With each failed play, his arrogance turned to irritation. He tried to provoke, but no longer found an echo. The rookie's firm silence was louder than any words. It was as if each calculated gesture said, "I'm no longer the same player you underestimated at the beginning." This kind of psychological confrontation is devastating because it destroys not only chips, but also confidence. And when a veteran's confidence is shaken, the entire castle of experience they've built begins to crumble. The entire table felt the impact. Players who had previously chuckled quietly were now tense, as if each round were a chapter in a book whose ending no one dared predict. And the audience cheered because they were witnessing a real transformation, the metamorphosis of someone insecure into a ruthless competitor. It was like watching the birth of a legend in real time. This kind of revelation touches people deeply because it reminds them that every human being harbors within them the capacity to break limits. The protagonist showed that you don't have to be born with the best cards. You just need to be willing to play each one with courage and intelligence. This confrontation also conveyed a universal message, that mental preparation is as important, if not more so, than any material resource. He had prepared not to win only when he had good cards, but to endure when all seemed lost. This applies to any field of life. The professional who prepares emotionally for crises, for example, can maintain focus while others panic. The athlete who trains the mind as well as the body endures when their legs give out. And the student who learns to deal with frustration doesn't give up at the first low grade. The secret lies not in external conditions, but in what you build within yourself. As the cards were revealed and the chips were drawn, the audience understood they weren't just watching a poker tournament. They were witnessing a story of resilience, courage, and strategic vision. The direct confrontation with his rival made it clear that it was no longer about luck. It was skill. It was preparation. It was the certainty that even the worst hand can become a lethal weapon when used with discipline and composure. And so, as the tension grew, everyone knew the climax was approaching. The question still remained: how far would he be able to push this courage? The entire room held its breath. The spotlights reflected off the stacks of chips, creating the sensation that every move was magnified, almost sacred. The protagonist, who had begun the night as a supporting player, now faced his greatest rival in a decisive moment, the dreaded all-in. It was the inevitable apex of that escalation, the moment when there was no more room for disguises or prolonged bluffs. Each chip sliding to the center of the table sounded like thunder in the absolute silence of the room. It was the final card, and the riskiest. The audience seemed mesmerized. Some spectators were on the edge of their seats. Others covered their mouths as if to contain their anticipation. Each revealed card was a blow to the heart of everyone watching. The rival, confident in his experience, wore a tense smile, the kind that tries to disguise uncertainty. The underdog, for his part, neither smiled nor frowned. He simply watched, steadfast, as if he had trained his entire life for this moment. This contrast between forced confidence and authentic serenity was what made the atmosphere unbearably tense. The cards were opened one by one, and the suspense reached almost cinematic heights. Each revelation seemed to confirm the obvious. The worst hand was about to be crushed by the weight of logic. But with each turn of the deck, the improbability became a possibility. The audience, which had previously cheered in silence, began to murmur, then exclaim, until the sounds of shock filled the room. Against all odds, he had turned the tables before everyone's eyes. It wasn't just a victory, it was the embodiment of the impossible. The rival, who until then had carried an aura of invincibility, remained paralyzed. His gaze betrayed the disbelief of someone who had just seen logic ripped to shreds. The entire table fell silent for a few seconds, a heavy silence that soon erupted into applause, shouts, and even nervous laughter from the audience. The scene wasn't just one of technical triumph, but of something greater. The moment when the EIE improbable becomes reality. It was proof that courage, boldness, and composure can, indeed, rewrite any destiny. The climax had arrived, and from that point on, history could never be the same. The underdog was no more. What lay before everyone was a legend in the making, and the certainty that the night still held developments that would further amplify the impact of this upset. The impact of the victory wasn't limited to the chips piled up in front of the protagonist. The true achievement was in the air, in the silent shift in perception that swept over the table. Those who had previously seen him as an underdog began to view him with respect. His rival, who until then seemed unshakable, lowered his eyes, accepting the defeat not just as a loss, but as a public lesson. It was narrative justice served, the scorned one transformed into a symbol of overcoming. The audience applauded not only for the technical play, but for its greater significance, proof that it's not always the cards that define your destiny, but how you choose to play them. This moment brought to light something that goes beyond poker. In life, everyone is dealt bad cards at some point. Financial limitations, unfair criticism, unfavorable conditions. And often we believe these are enough to spell our failure. But there, in front of hundreds of witnesses, it became clear that courage and strategy can turn any scenario around. The protagonist showed that luck may open doors, but it is determination that keeps someone seated at the table until the end. This is true justice. When effort overcomes prejudice, when boldness defeats skepticism, and when resilience becomes greater than any statistic. In the end, it wasn't just an individual victory. It was a message to everyone present, and symbolically to everyone who watches stories like this. Life doesn't just reward those who are dealt good hands, but especially those who have the courage to masterfully play bad ones. And that's why, that night, an underdog went from being just another name in a tournament to becoming a living legend, proving that justice isn't just about winning, it's about transforming weakness into respect. When the silence at the table was broken by applause, the protagonist took a deep breath and realized that this victory wasn't in the cards. It wasn't luck, nor an unlikely miracle. It was the courage to stay in the game when everyone expected his downfall. He looked around and understood that the true achievement wasn't just the chips, but the respect he'd earned. He had proven, before everyone, that even the worst hand can carry an invisible force when guided by determination. And this resonated with every person in the audience, because each had experienced a moment when it seemed they had no chance. This victory brought an inevitable reflection. In life, we don't control the cards we're dealt, but we do control how we play each one. How many times have we given up too soon, convinced by external voices that it wasn't worth trying? How many times have we believed our limitations were definitive, when, in fact, they were merely invitations to prove our strength? Poker, that night, became a metaphor for life. The protagonist showed that it's not what you hold in your hands that decides your destiny, but the courage to take risks, to face the challenges, and to believe even when everyone doubts. As he collected his chips, he knew the tournament ended here, but the legend was just beginning. The message was clear, simple, and powerful. In gambling and in life, even the worst hand can be enough to win, as long as you have the courage to stay at the table.